Welcome in to the Fun Astrology Podcast. It is Hump Day, June 17th. Thomas Miller, thanks for joining us. It is more dreaded than tax day. And unlike tax day, this happens 3 times a year, not just once. What am I talking about? Mercury Retrograde, of course. And if you are listening to this right now, which you are, I love it when people say that. If you're listening to this, then blah, blah, blah. It happened at 12:58 a.m. this morning. That's why I was saying, if you're listening to this, Mercury's in retrograde. It's already there. Now, the question is, should we fear Mercury retrograde the way that it gets painted up to be? Yes and no. So, obviously, you know how I approach this, right? There are always 2 sides to the coin in astrology. Duality or polarity is your biggest friend in astrology. In fact, I'll give you one of the biggest astrological tips that is like, if you get this, then astrology just opens up to you. I always say the answers are on the other side of the chart. So if you're struggling with something about your sun sign that's not complete, and the sun is in Gemini right now, look across the chart. The answers are in Sagittarius or close by. The north node, south node is on an axis. It's just that there are oppositions for a reason in astrology. It is a system that is built on there's this and there's that. People ask about dating opposite signs. For example, let's just stay with the sun is in Gemini right now. Should I date a Sagittarian? Well, it's interesting because it can complete some areas of your Gemini that are incomplete, that no other sign can, and opposites often push against each other. So you get that dynamic of yes and yes, or yes and no. Depends on how much work you want to do, I guess. So we're not going to go on here and say that Mercury retrograde is always all bad. Now, we did have the perfect storm the beginning of this year, and when coronavirus was expanding, Mercury was retrograding. And now it's so funny because I'm working on this radio show that is sponsored by all the hospitals in North Texas. So I've been really close to this whole coronavirus conversation, and especially from the healthcare perspective, which is we've got to make sure that we don't max out our capacity. And when they initially looked at China and Italy, they thought that might be a real danger. Well, shutting down the economy, I think, was certainly not the other answer, but all the numbers of these places that have reopened are starting to pop up again because people forgot one little detail. The virus never changed. Just because we all wanted to get back to some kind of a normal existence, the virus never changed. So here we have Mercury retrograde again, and it will be interesting to see because in astrology, you really don't look at Mercury as anything connected to a virus, at least a non-computer virus. Now, a computer virus spreading around the world, yes, Mercury retrograde, that would be a match. But a physical virus, you're more in the realm of Neptune or Pluto. So let's think again about what happens during Mercury retrograde. What causes Mercury retrograde? Well, remember, Mercury laps around the sun every 88 days, and it comes between the Earth and the sun. Now, sometimes from our perspective at points on Earth, you can see Mercury against the sun. We had that, what was that, last fall, I believe, right? Wasn't that the one in the fall, and then the one in January was not? But one of them recently, you could see Mercury against the sun. Typically, I forget the frequency of that, but typically you can't. The angles aren't lined up right on the orbits, but the Mercury still is passing between the Earth and the sun in its orbit. Mercury retrograde. If you could see Mercury at night, and if you were tracking Mercury in the sky at night, you would notice that it had slowed down, like it's almost in the same spot every night. It's not moving. And then you would see it retracing its steps. I think that's why everybody talks about Mercury messing with your technology. I think that's sunspots. It's the same thing as a big sunspot. Now, it will be interesting because Mercury, of course, is in charge of the sun right now because the sun is in Gemini. So Mercury in retrograde is ruling the sun's sign right now. And Mercury is actually one sign over in Cancer. So this retrograde technically is happening in Cancer. I was just saying that it's ruling the sun sign as well. How long does this retrograde last? Glad you asked. July 12th. And remember that Mercury is not complete from its retrograde until it has retraced all of its steps. So it has to get back to 14 degrees Cancer before it is out of the shadow. Here's my thought on this Mercury retrograde summer of 2020, and that is that the world is already so tender right now that all of these astrological influences, I think, are having an influence, and they all amount to something. So remember Sunday, we had that square between Pluto and Eris at 24 degrees. And I've really got my eye on this alignment tomorrow that we'll talk about in tomorrow's podcast, again, between Pluto, Mars, and Eris. And you bring all these things together, it's already tender. You know, energy perpetuates itself. Have you noticed that in your own life? Whenever you get on a good trajectory, it's hard to even do something wrong. Whenever you get on a bad, like where negative stuff happens time after time, it's like you think, is this ever going to end? Energy feeds energy, and I think that's what's going on right now, is that when everything snapped from Saturn-Pluto, the domino trip was January 12th, 2020, when Saturn and Pluto conjoined in Capricorn. But now we're in that domino fall, and the energy is just feeding itself. It's like a hurricane. Hurricane sits out off the coast and just feeds itself warm water, and it gets bigger and stronger, and that's kind of what's going on here. So yes, I think there is some concern, some things to watch. What do you do? Nothing any different than you would do any other time. You just set intentions and you get a little bit closer to your spiritual practice. If you've been a little bit slack, you tighten it up. It would be a great thing to do. Oh, the other thing about Mercury retrograde is it's a real good time to just kind of unplug from all the technological stuff. It's like a little 3 times a year, you just take a little break. So for the next 3 weeks, July 12th being the next date of this, is you just kind of relax and you recenter yourself, get refocused, get regrounded. Great thing to do. Perfect time. All right, that's how you handle it. We will talk tomorrow about this big Super 24. What are we talking about? Pluto, Mars, and Eris. We'll dissect that one tomorrow. Have a great day. Bye-bye.